Okay, I want to discuss Howard Finkel. Unfortunately, we just found out Howard Finkel has passed away. I'm not sure of Howard's exact age or the details of his passing, but I had met Howard Finkel a few times, most prominently in 2013 at the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame convention. A good friend of mine for many years, Joe Bruin, Hardcore Joe Bruin, runs this convention, and Howard Finkel was the MC of the Hall of Fame there in New England. And in 2013, he really had a blockbuster year. He had Warlord and Barbarian, Big Van Vader, Sonny, so many. Matt Bourne was there, and Matt Bourne, Doink, passed away about a week later. Jake the Snake was there. But in charge of all these wrestlers, there was probably 50 wrestlers of name value. Marty Jannetty's running around with a Doink wig at the hotel. The Fink was the guy in charge of this thing as far as the actual ceremony. He was the MC. And I sat in the front row, and it was plenty of seats, but I sat near Howard Finkel, and I remember saying to the Fink, hey, they, meaning WWE, should have never let you go. And Fink said, amen, brother. And it was nice to compliment the guy. Jim Ross is often credited as being the voice of wrestling, but in a lot of ways, Howard Finkel was the voice of wrestling, at least in the Northeast. And everybody is going to do their Howard Finkel impersonations. This contest is scheduled for one fall. And if you really think about it, Howard Finkel's ring announcing or his voice carried through at least 3 generations for pro wrestling fans. The 70s, if you ever seen those Madison Square Garden shows, especially with the microphone dropping from the ceiling and Fink taking it and having that authority. So the late 70s, those house shows with whether it was Bruno Sammartino or Bob Backlund or Dusty Rhodes, Superstar Graham, Chief Jay Strongbow, Howard Finkel, probably in his 30s or 40s at that time. Then you go to the 80s and what's sometimes called the golden era or the rock and wrestling era. And you think about things like WrestleMania 1 and the Fink, so authoritative and even sharing the microphone at WrestleMania 1. I think they had a guest ring announcer, Billy Martin, and the Fink was very helpful and respectful to get Billy Martin prepared to be the ring announcer for the main event, WrestleMania 1. I think I have that correct. WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3, all these events where the Fink and his presence was an integral part of it. And then moving forth into the Monday Night Raw, early 90s, 93, when Monday Night Raw started, and then in the Attitude Era, Fink was a part of it, but he also found himself sharing the ball, so to speak, with people like Lillian Garcia. And, WWE wanted to have a female presence, and Lillian was very good at her job. But you could see that the Fink, was kind of being used in different ways. I remember an X-Pac storyline, X-Pac, Jeff Jarrett shaving the Fink's hair, I believe, or the remains of his hair. And the Fink actually getting involved in a pay-per-view, I want to say SummerSlam 99 or Fully Loaded 99. It had something to do with X-Pac and I believe Jeff Jarrett. So the Fink started getting involved in the action. And then, unfortunately, at some point, I don't know exactly when, but the Fink started getting used less and less. And then at some point, the WWE kind of put him on a part-time basis, and that's when we started seeing the Fink get this second life in some of these wrestling conventions and other things. And I do know that Joe Bruin and the New England Hall of Fame honored Howard Finkel with a very nice surprise induction ceremony. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to that one, but I know that did happen. And I'm not sure if Howard Finkel is in the WWE Hall of Fame or not. He should be, by any accounts. It should have been in there for a long time. And I don't want to say that he is or he's not. I just can't remember. This is bad news, sad news. But when we have these deaths of people, pro wrestlers, people involved in wrestling, I like to think of how they lived their life, not when they passed away. And with Howard Finkel, you got to think that this guy had a great time. I mean, he was an authoritative voice of pro wrestling. The only one I could compare him to as a ring announcer is kind of an obscure guy, but I think his name was Dr. Tom Miller in Greensboro, North Carolina, who you might hear on some of those Greensboro Midnight Express, Rock and Roll Express, the Dusty Rhodes, the guy that did the voice for the first War Games. Now, totally different part of the territories, so to speak. But what I was just saying to a friend of mine, Angelo from Wrestling with the Future, talking about Fink and his greatness as a ring announcer, is that some of these guys in that era, 70s, 80s, 90s, they had these authoritative voices that further cemented and sold you that this stuff was legitimate. And no offense to any of the Brandy Rhodes or the Lillian Garcias, but I do think that there's something to be said for these male ring announcers who just had a presence and an authority and a bass in their voice that you can't just put a 26, 27-year-old spokeswoman model type into the ring. Now some of these female ring announcers have become quite good. Brandy's quite good. Lillian's quite good. But sometimes with WWE especially, they just have the model of the month in the ring, trying to sell you on this thing, and I'm sorry folks, it just doesn't have the same authority. Okay, I mean, if you were to take Michael Buffer and say, oh, we're not going to do Michael Buffer for boxing or for anything, we're going to remove him and put Cindy Crawford or Carol Alt in his spot in history. It just wouldn't work. So sorry, accuse me of being a fucking sexist, but I'm going to put over these male ring announcers like Howard Finkel, Tom Miller, and so forth. That's how I feel. So that's it, folks. Howard Finkel, we can mourn, we can grieve, but let's remember that he probably had more of a life than any of us did. And if he was suffering physically, I don't know if he was, but now he's not. So the Fink lives on through all his great ring announcing work for the legends, the Brunos, Andres, Hogans, Rocky Johnsons, all the great work that Howard Finkel did, the Attitude Era, the post-Attitude Era, all these conventions, just thinking of him and Mean Gene, probably reminiscing and reunioning in the heavens today. So keep Howard Finkel's family in your hearts. Respect professional wrestling the way it should be, the way it ought to be, not this sideshow that it's become. And hail to Howard Finkel, greatest ring announcer of all time, Mike Messier.